fundamentally for me, it just comes down to like, I think entrepreneurs are like this. If you see a problem in the world that bothers you personally, your mind kind of gets fixated on it and you're like, I don't want to live in a world where this is a problem. And so like, I'm going to fix this problem. And that's really where TruBill came from is I was like, how do I like just see what subscriptions I have? And I was like, this should exist because there are sites like Mint where they pull in all of your transactions, so they should be able to find the subscriptions within them. And the reason Truebill exists is because Mint they didn't build that feature. And so I looked at it and I was like, this is like, why don't they have this? And we also knew this is at the time people were still paying AOL subscriptions from like 20 years ago, right? That they just forgot about. And we just knew that there's just a lot of people who accidentally pay for stuff, and ourselves included. So we did that. We built a little algorithm for ourselves. We looked at our own data, and all of us found stuff we were paying for that we didn't want to be paying for. In my case, I was paying for security on a home that I had moved out of like a year earlier, $40 a month. So
I heard your brother had some kind of in-flight internet that instead of paying the one-time fee, he paid the monthly, forgot to cancel, and you just go on and on. And so you're just going through your own bills saying, do we have anything in here that we've been repeatedly paying? You see it. Got it.
Well, we didn't actually look at we actually built a little thing. So in like Excel, we imported our transactions into Excel, and then we wrote like a little algorithm in Excel to look for like recurring stuff. And then that little algorithm found it. And that was the genesis of like the early TrueBill algorithm.
I heard the next step was to going to friends and family and saying, can we do this for you? Was that still in Excel at that point?
No, at that point we put up a little site where basically you could log in, connect your accounts, and Plaid had just launched. So this is what happens when a new technology comes. Plaid makes it easy to connect to other banks. Right. So they had just launched, which enabled this to happen. And so we took that, we connected it, and then we ran our algorithm on top and just like presented like, here's your subscriptions. And that's the thing we shared with our friends.
Do you think you could have built this without Plaid having been launched?
So there was another site called Yodlee, or another company called Yodlee that had it, but
they were flawed, right?
Like, it would have been more expensive, and I'm not sure we would have wanted to like they had like big minimums and stuff like that. They weren't, it wasn't as straightforward. So no, actually what happened is when I mentioned the idea, for me, I was always like, but it would be so hard to get these bank connections. I always assumed Mint had like built them one-on-one. My brother sitting next to me is like, that's funny. I've just been working with this API that's like a banking API for this other idea I had. And I was like, oh my God. So he already had gotten that working. Like he had it there. And so those things just came together. We're like, oh my God, like we could put this up in a week. And that's kind of what happened.
Arun, I remember Andy Radcliffe, the founder of Wealthfront and previously a venture capitalist. He said, everyone thinks just about what's the problem that exists that I could solve. And he says, a lot of times it's just what's the new technology that's out there, and now how can we apply it? And yes, it's how can I apply it to problems that exist today? How can I apply it to problems that exist before? But he's more about, he opened my eyes to the concept of finding new technology and then figuring out what you could do with it. And I asked him, how did that happen with Wealthfront? And he said, well, similarly to you, he said, suddenly banks were making their APIs available. We didn't have to create a whole new Schwab. We could just interact with what existed and allow people to have a layer of auto investing or management and so on. What do you think of that as a concept?
I think it's really interesting. You just have to there's always a risk of like creating a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. And so I think it's fine to start with the technology, but you've still got to be really smart about like, are we solving a problem? But in fintech, we saw a ton of this. A lot of the fintech explosion is not people building core technologies beneath it. They're building UI layers on top of existing stuff. And so you had a generation of companies that are now the pickaxes of the world, like Plaid and other other sort of servicing companies that are sitting at that API layer. So they did all that hard work. Then there's people sit on top like Chime and others that are just brands on top of Chime, Wealthfront, Betterment, like all these things that are brands that sit on top of it. And it can be very disruptive because then you can move super fast. the barriers there, it's kind of like an industry used to have barriers to entry, and a new technology has removed those barriers. So that industry was artificially being held back, and like the banks or whoever it is, the people who were there had like an artificial moat that was there. And what happens? The technology is like they build a bridge over the moat that these companies had. And what was a moat yesterday is not a moat today. And suddenly, like the troops can come over. I think that's
Got
the way to think about it. But you
got
still
it.
need to make sure you're attacking a problem and all of that.